Welcome back to another Photorec.tv critique show. This week's show, landscape images. Just want to thank everybody who submitted their work. You know, as I've said previously, if you watched all of the episodes up to now, you've heard this again and again. This is a fantastic way to grow as a photographer, but it's not always so easy to put yourself out there. If you'd like to learn more about how you can submit your images to Photorec.tv for critiques, just simply go to Photorec.tv/crits. Let's get started with our landscape shots. Just a reminder as we get started, from each week I'll be picking my favorite image. That will live for a week on top of the Photorec.tv Facebook page as the little cover image. So our first image submitted, we have the raw and then we have the processed JPEG. The minimal processing. This is a beautiful spot. Wow. Looking down at this gigantic valley, partially flooded. Let's switch to our develop panel. So the first thing I notice is you did what I would do as well to this image, and that is, let's come back and work on the raw. Bring up those shadows because there is detail in here. I would like to see it better. So I'm going to bring up those shadows a good bit, somewhere right around there. I think that looks nice. And now we can really kind of get the flow and the scale too. We have some building perched up there. What a view, what a place. So I really like that. I actually might bump the overall exposure a bit so we can really kind of get this feeling in the valley down below us. I can bring the shadows back down a little bit now as well. And then I might use my gradient tool. There's not a lot of detail in the clouds, which that is a bit of a bummer, especially since they take up a lot of this, a lot of the view. But let's try to bring a few more out using our gradient tool, bringing this down, and I'm just going to drop the exposure a little bit and the highlights a little bit. And so we can see just a little bit more of this kind of undulation of the clouds. I like that. Pretty minor. Otherwise, I think this is a really nice shot. Looking at shooting this again, if we could sidestep this guy right here and move a little bit to the right and shoot avoiding that, that would be neat, or a little bit to the left and shoot more down, straight down the valley. Those would be interesting things as well. What happens if we bring our highlights down a little bit? Do we get a little bit more out of that far, far sunlight? Not too much. But that's pretty cool. And this is actually a great example of a place to use our dehaze tool, which I bet they're going to move that up to the basic panel soon. If we dehaze it, we ended up a little bit bluer, but I like down below. You know what? Let's do that with a gradient tool. So let's bring our gradient up into this area somewhere, and I'm going to grab it out at the edges. That makes it easier to turn and bring it up a little bit more. And this is where I'm going to use the dehaze. Went the wrong way. Dehaze. Looks good. And one of the things is it gets a little bluer. I'm going to warm it up just a little bit. And I think that makes it a little bit crispier there. And let's hit our backsplash to see our before and our after. Before and our after. I think that's an improvement. All right. Alexandra's got this beautiful field. A really nice spot. I like this a lot. I wonder if we isolate this tree. I'm going to say unoriginal, or sorry, yeah, unoriginal. What if we do that? No, it doesn't quite have the same feel to it, does it? So let's reset that. You know, this tree here doesn't really add anything to it. If we'd backed up further and gotten both of them kind of framing the scene, then maybe that would work as well. I still think it's a nice image. I'm just curious how it would work. The only other suggestion I have in here, I shouldn't say only other because I often come up with more as I'm working, is to, again, let's bring up the shadows and see what this area holds down here, this kind of green strip right before all of this riot of yellow. So it's interesting, but you know, the shadows don't bring it up so much. So let's go back to that gradient tool again. I use the gradient tool a lot in my landscape images. And so what happens if we do that right there? This soft green that kind of sets the stage before we get to the yellow, I think, is a key part of this image, and I really think it's a little bit of a stronger image now that we have that there. This is fantastic, and I think there are a lot of additional images that you could work on at a scene like this. A close one of the flowers and the background not totally out of focus, but just those green trees up on the hill in the background, or set off, somewhere there must be a way to get up to these trees and do one of the classic isolate the tree shots on top of the hill surrounded by this yellow riot of flowers. And then, of course, just concentrating on the flowers themselves. And this looks like a pretty sunny, I'm not sure what time of day you shot this at. Let's see if we can figure it out looking at this 1 p.m. It does feel like a shot at 1 p.m. To some degree, not terribly. I think you've done a nice job here of balancing this. But if you are going to shoot the flowers at that time, think about shooting them backlit to kind of avoid those harsher, more direct light on the face of the subject you're shooting, in this case, flower petals. Nice job. Ooh, the tones, color, contrast here. This is a really cool image in a really cool place. One of the first things I think about when I see an image like this is what would a really long exposure do that would just kind of smooth out this water and be a very strong contrast in terms of texture to all of this sharp and kind of hard rocks and hard beach. But that said, I think you've got a nice shot here. The color of the water is fantastic. I love all of this. I'm going to bring up those shadows. I feel like we've lost detail here in this bits of rock. You've done that already. Let's bring up the exposure a little bit more then and see if we can bring those shadows up a little bit more. Not too much. The mood, I like the mood. So really then I'm just going to paint. I'll do exposure, but then we can do shadows as well later. And just kind of bring that up in that area. It's not doing a whole lot, is it? Let's increase our flow and also bring our shadows up. There we go, a little bit more. Oop, oop. There. Just that bit is really all I needed to kind of make myself a little bit happier. Let's see, did you put any gradients in the sky? Let's see, what did that gradient do? Increase the contrast, exposure came down. What happens if we bring let's show selected mask overlay. That's too much, obviously. The color difference up in the sky is interesting to me, and I'm not quite sure where that's coming from. Based on your changes here, I think it's pretty natural. And some of it's coming out of the clarity and the saturation as well. I don't know. That's one other thing. It's almost painterly-like in some ways. So I'm going to leave it and take your artistic decision there and leave that. But overall, I think this is a really cool scene. And man, this watercolor and those rocks lost, or starting to be lost in the haze back there, is very cool. I like this. Caroline has a calmer, more still landscape than our lot with a lot of color. Ooh, I can see you really boosted the shadows. So again, if you have to boost the shadows that much, why not the exposure? So let me see. If I bring our shadows down, but bring our overall exposure up. So you were really trying to keep that sky in check. And I think a nice way to do that is with the gradient tool. So it's really just affecting the area that you want. So we want our exposure to be down a little bit like that. And we can bring this like so. And maybe not quite that much, but somewhere right around there looks pretty good to me. Now you say, well, it's hitting some of the stuff that I want. So that's what I love. This is the not so new feature anymore, but it's being able to edit the gradient. So if we turn our show selected mask on for this gradient right now, you can see that where that gradient is affecting. And we can brush, I'm actually brushing the eraser to erase that off there and off the tree tops, like so. And it does a very good job when auto mask is turned on, usually, to make sure that it does in fact not erase outside of the subject that you're primarily brushing on. And that's it, done. Now another place that I would like to try here is, what if we do a gradient down in the water? Yep. Somewhere right around there. Let's turn that back off. Now let's really amp up the clarity. Really kind of makes that water punchy and reflective. I really like that. So those are some suggestions for post-processing, but let's step back for a second because I've kind of forgotten about. This is a pretty cool scene, but this is one of those ones where I'm not sure the deliberateness of the framing. So you've done a nice job. You've straightened this a little bit and cropped it in just a little bit. I love these arches over here, and we just get just a taste of them. Is there any more of that? Could we shoot that a little bit more deliberately? I think would be something I would like to see, and or just shoot the trees. But having just a little bit of those arches, I'm not sure. I do like them. I'd love, this is one of those ones in the comments, I'd love for you all to say, do you want to focus on just the trees, or do you like having those arches over there on the right hand side? Another thing I would do in post-processing is you could probably pretty easily take this pole out with not too much work using that the brush tool. But overall, I think you've done a nice job, Caroline, and you've done a nice job post-processing at this as well. Fabio has this shot in the Netherlands. This is a similar shot in some ways, different colors, much more orange and red. And in this case, I would brighten those shadows. You've done that a lot. So again, this is where I think I would get my gradient tool and just use the gradient tool to kind of bring up those darker areas so it's not so dark in there. That's a great way to bring those up. We can both bring our exposures up and our shadows up, and I think that we have a stronger image as a result. This gradient really starts to kind of peter out up there, so you might want to bring it up even a little bit more. And as I said, I showed brushing to erase, but you can also brush to add strength to the gradient. So in this case, I'm really brushing on a greater effect to make sure that we've got it in there. And then similar thing, I would do a gradient and really punch up the clarity of that water. Let's do that real quick. And then we have just a very reflective surface working here. This is a really beautiful spot, and I think you've captured it quite nicely. Maybe you could make an argument for coming in on the left a little bit, getting rid of that darker area. It doesn't add much, and then we just have a nice kind of green space, and then tree, 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 and then balanced over here by the larger structure. I think that's very nicely done. Jason has a salt marsh, and then he's got his edited version of that salt marsh. So I do like that you have cropped this in now. I think, is that true? Did you do that or did I do that? I remember looking at it thinking this looks better as a 16 by 9 panorama. However, I do feel like you've gone a little too far with the crunchiness of it, and so I would back that off a little bit. So first let's redo what you're doing here. 16 by 9. I think that is nice. We're splitting the horizon almost equal, but in this case it works for me. I would increase that contrast a good bit. I like the blacks to come down, the whites to go up a little bit, and a little bit of clarity. Did I end up exactly where you are? Now yours is definitely, and you've added the blue as well. I might add a little bit more blue, cool it a little, and this is again, gradient tool, starting to feel like a broken record repeating. But that allows you to really kind of just impact part of the image so the whole thing doesn't have that same kind of overly done, overly saturated look. But I think this is a very pretty scene. There's not a ton going on here. It's not a super exciting image, but it certainly is a nice image, and it's kind of serene and peaceful, and I like it. Max is headed up someplace into the mountains and has what is a very nice shot. It's going to be even nicer when these flowers bloom right here. I think that's something that will bloom eventually. Right now, that foreground bit there doesn't add a whole lot for me. And so I would come in a little bit. Not that much. Yeah. This one might be where you can get up just a little bit higher and shoot down. This valley is amazing here. And so I think coming up a little bit and getting a sense of this drop in front of us down leading into the valley, that would make for a stronger image. But overall, I think that is really nice. I bet you've used the dehaze. I might try brushing it on in the back a little bit more. No, I can never remember which way to go. Just bring some of those foreground mountains out of the mist a little bit more. So they're not quite as lost. I like the ones in the distance being lost. That gives us a real sense of scale there, which is good. But the ones in the foreground, I'd like them to pop a little bit more. That's a little bit stronger than I like, and this little bit of mist laying in here starts to kind of create a halo effect that looks like we've edited more than we have. So we want to be careful about that. Bring that back just a little bit. But just that right there, I think, helps this image a little bit, along with thinking about the cropping. And the other thing, if we look back at your settings again, your highlights are down lots and your shadows are all the way up to 100. So you do want to watch that. If you find yourself doing that often, you might want to think about shooting a bracketed image so you don't have to. Because what happens when you bring your shadows all the way up to 100 is you get some of this, I want to say flatter look to it, and it doesn't quite pop as much as bringing up your exposure as well. So this could be another one where you bring up your overall exposure. See, there is plenty of dynamic range here still. We've brought that up. But then, let's use the gradient tool in the sky now. We can bring the exposure down there a bunch more. Oof, that's terrible. What happened? I think I'm working on top of too many of your edits, Max. I think we've over-edited that. So let's reset that. Let's close that. And let's bring our exposure back down to somewhere about roughly where you had it. The one thing I was trying to avoid here is this bright area here is a little too much, a little too bright. But otherwise, as I said, very nice. Dave Ricker has some soft flowing water. I am a sucker for shots like this. I think this is nice. Looks like we're working with a square. I tell you what, I would crop in more. This tree with its little bit of space on the right doesn't seem to me to add anything in that area above it either. If we come right in here, now we've really kind of focused on this water. That part of the tree that adds is the thing. We can come in a little bit more. We don't need any part of that tree. And I think that's a nice shot there. Let's add some clarity. Let's bring those highlights down a little bit and a little bit more contrast. So really think about, when you look at a scene like this, what is your subject? What is it? And you know, if it is this flowing water, then that's what we want to catch. And we want to focus in and really choose our composition carefully and not just try to kind of get the whole pretty scene, because just because it's a whole pretty scene doesn't mean it all is going to capture well. And more pictures, you know, right here, just this, an abstract, almost black and white shot right here would be cool. Some of it sliding down here. So many photographic possibilities here. Looks fantastic. All right, so now we've come to the part of the show where I need to pick one of these to live as the Facebook cover page for a while. There are some very strong images this week, and so I need to take a moment and think about this. And I've made my decision. Joha, as I believe Trilina has told me multiple times. This fantastic image is going to live as the cover page for the photorec.tv Facebook for a period of time. The colors in here, I just love the tones of this image and especially the color of the water. You've done a really nice job there, and this is a great image. Thank you. And that's all for this week's theme. If you found this video helpful, give it a quick thumbs up. If you would like to submit an image for a future critique, visit photorec.tv/crits, that's C-R-I-T-S, to learn more about how you can do that and improve your photography. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.